second part of this demo, we'll bring photographs from Camera Raw into Adobe Photoshop and talk about the editing potential that we have there. Here I have my 3 pictures that I edited in Camera Raw, and now I will go down here to the bottom right, and then I will say Open Images. That'll automatically bring up Adobe Photoshop because the 2 programs are linked together, made by the same company. Wait for these to open. All right. Awesome. So I'll start with this photograph right here, and I want to pay attention to my layers panel. And the first thing that I want to do, if your layers panel isn't open, by the way, you can hit F7, and that's a shortcut to bring up your layers, making them reappear. I want to practice non-destructive editing on these photos too, and like I said, it's a little bit harder in Photoshop because if we just go to image adjustments and then start editing this way through vibrance, hue, saturation, color balance, that is going to distort or change the pixels here. So if we do a lot of editing just like this through our traditional panel, we are going to lose a lot of our original information, not being able to get it back. One way to fix this, or to kind of safeguard it, is to copy the background, dragging the background layer down, hovering above the copy layer button, and then leaving this background layer is locked. So we know now that if we mess this one up a lot and we so much want to go back, we can. If you ever want to see how certain adjustments are altering your picture, you can unclick this eyeball button here and it will show you what your picture looked like before you did that specific adjustment. We, like I'm talking about, we want to keep as many of our adjustments separate from one another as possible so that we have the greatest control, and if we don't like something, we don't have to start all the way over. We can just delete or uncheck the visibility on that specific adjustment. So we've copied the background layer, and one of the, I think in just traditional picture editing, important panels is the adjustment panel. Usually it's located right over here. If you can't find it, you can go to Window and then find Adjustment. There is no shortcut for it, so if it does disappear, you'll go Window, click Adjustments. And what this does is it takes the same stuff, the same kind of adjustments that are up here, but it applies it on its own separate adjustment layer instead of on the picture layer itself. So, sorry about that. Some of the more important or widely used adjustment layers include brightness and contrast, levels, curves, as well as saturation, photo filter, and some other things. We'll start with brightness and contrast. I'll click this. And then as you can see, this pops up on its own separate layer, and then this dialog box pops up here. So I can adjust the brightness if I want to. Again, if it's an underexposed photograph, we can kind of help to remedy that. You don't want to lose edges or start to lose really important information, such as this would be way too bright. Sometimes with portrait photography, less is more, and that's a difficult thing for some people to employ. I know it is for me. Sometimes I overdo things. Bump down the contrast a little bit. All right, and I can go to now a different adjustment layer. Levels is kind of similar to brightness and contrast. This is called a histogram. And it shows you, it's a graph of where how many dark values you have, how many mid-tone values you have, and then how many light values you have in your photograph. So you can see that the highest amount of values here is probably at about 20%, so like a dark gray, but not completely black. So I can move these toggles to the left or to the right to adjust my level or amount of midtones, brights, and darks. Let's say I don't like what I did there, I liked it better the other way, I can check by unclicking the eyeball, re-clicking it, and if I really don't like my adjustment layer, I can either leave it and just unclick the visibility, or I can click and drag it down so that I'm not doing this to my picture, I'm doing it on a separate layer, practicing non-destructive editing. We have curves. You saw this. You saw a lot of these in Camera Raw. You can also change the type, especially on curves. I like to change the type of layer that it is, so I can go down to luminosity so that I'm playing with the brightness or the glow. I can also drop down the opacity of the layer, and we'll get into this more as we go on with Photoshop, but this just tells the computer at what level do I want to view this change. So it's kind of, I can bump it down here, and then I'm seeing this change at 29% instead of at a full 100%. Another adjustment layer that I can add is Vibrance. Again, my dialog box pops up here. We did this in Camera Raw, but if you kind of want to simulate that old kind of vintagey effect, you can drop down the Vibrance and or the Saturation to include hints of desaturated color that are kind of dull. In turn, you can also bump both of them way up to get kind of a overly chromatic effect. And again, I can always play with the opacity of this layer as well. So I'm going to bring that back down to kind of where I wanted it. There we go. We have hue and saturation. Hue changes the overall color. I'm going to put this back at 0. Lightness, this just brightens the whole picture or darkens the whole picture. So again, if I end up not clicking something and then not using it, I can always drag it down to the trash. Color balance, this sometimes helps. Let's say if something has like a really orange tint or a blue tint, you can always choose the complementary color of that. So for example, in this photo is just fine, but if there is too much red in this, for example, I could just bump this down a little bit to try and correct for some for the color that I kind of want to ignore or get rid of. So I could kind of bump this down and make the tonality just that much cooler. And again, just subtle editing is sometimes better. It's up to you. Black and white. I can play with the opacity here if I want to. Kind of similar to Vibrance and Saturation. I'm going to delete this because I don't want it to be in black and white. Photo filter is sometimes kind of fun. Here are some pre-made filters. These are filters that exist in the film world. So if you want to use any of those, and if you're familiar, these are filters that you could, it simulates a filter that you could like buy for a camera. Here's a cooling filter. This is another way to kind of change the color balance. And then this density is how intense the filter is. So I could just bump this down to 7%, and it would have a drastically different effect than if I chose it to be at 100%. That's about everything I will talk about in the adjustment layers panel. There are a few different things that you can do down here in the effects panel, and like the adjustment panel, I like effects because it allows you to make manipulations or changes on separate layers. So color overlay is very similar to what we just did, the photo filter. I could choose that, and don't it looks alarming. The default is red, so I can click and then choose another color. We're kind of going with blues here. Let's choose a blue like this. And then I can play with the blending modes. We'll talk about blending modes a lot more when we do our surreal project and when we do our double exposures. But changing the blending modes changes the way that this top layer, the color, interacts with the bottom layer, which is the picture. And each one kind of initiates a different visual response. So if you see anything here that you really like, you can always bump down the opacity of the layer. Oops. And you get a lot of different effects. So you're changing again the way that this color interacts with your photograph. Let's choose soft white. Let's see. Okay, something like this may change things like brightness and contrast, so that made it a little bit darker. Maybe I would want to I'm going to change those just a little bit, and I can because instead of doing everything on this one layer, I've done everything on separate layers, which is something we really want to get used to in Photoshop. Another thing that I can do within my effects panel is I can choose a pattern overlay. This can be kind of fun. This landed on a bizarre one. If I click my pattern here, the default, I believe, will be like bubbles or something like that. But you can choose any of these pattern, like groups of swatches. So let's say I want to make this look like it's on canvas. I'll do that again. Click this little gear right here, and then say Artist Brushes Canvas. I'll say okay, yeah, I'll replace those. And don't necessarily like any of those. What else could we do? Oops. Click here. Color paper, artist surfaces. You can try artist surfaces. This is another popular thing for sometimes or lately to have images like printed on canvas. Go ahead and choose one that you like. That one's okay. And then I can scale it. So, you know, I want the tooth of the canvas to be more visually apparent. And then I can go ahead and choose my blending modes like I did previously. And it can look like Jerry is printed on canvas. Overlay is one of my favorites here, and then I can drop down the opacity of that so that if I were to print this, the surface just kind of barely looks textured. And then here you can see that my layer kind of has sub-layers. I have effects and color overlay, and I can uncheck any of these. The last things that I'll look at is just I'll uncheck all of these eyeballs and kind of look at the picture before I went into Photoshop and look at the picture after I went into Photoshop, and just ask myself the simple question, do I like it better like this, or do I like it better before I started? If I like it better before I started, how can I kind of do away with some of the things that I've done and then try different combinations until I get something that I like a little bit more. This concludes this tutorial in Photoshop, and the next final one will be brief, and it will go over some of the editing adjustments in Photoshop that can be made that are slightly destructive to the original pictures, but if done to a copy can elicit some kind of artistic, abstracted effects.